I always thought honeymoons were supposed to be the pinnacle of romance, the grand finale after the chaos of wedding planning, the reward, the breathless chapter where love feels infinite and you tell yourself, this is forever. For me, it started exactly like the postcards promised. We stepped off that little plane into paradise. The air hit me like warm silk, salty and thick with the smell of the ocean. I could see the turquoise waves curling against white sand, the sunlight bouncing off the water so bright it almost hurt my eyes. People clapped when we landed, like they were congratulating us personally for making it here. And in that moment, I let myself believe I was the luckiest bride alive. Daniel, my brand new husband, slipped his hand into mine. He was grinning like a man who owned the world. He leaned close and whispered, "Welcome to our forever, Anna." His voice was honeyed, smooth, like he'd been rehearsing that line for months. And I melted, because I wanted to. I wanted to believe him. The resort had sent a driver holding up a little sign with our names, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I stared at it longer than I should have. It looked surreal, my name tied to his. It made my heart flutter in my chest. I thought, softer, I thought it meant something secret. The ride to the resort was everything a honeymoon should be. Champagne bottles sweating with condensation, a basket of tropical fruit I didn't even know the names of, and Daniel snapping selfies of us in the back seat while the sun painted his skin gold. He kept saying, "This is just the beginning. We deserve this. You deserve this." And each time he said it, I believed him a little more. But long silence. My gut wasn't silent. You ever have that weird, quiet pull in your stomach? That whisper that something doesn't add up even when everything looks perfect on the outside? That was me, sitting in the back of that car, smiling like a fool, while something cold curled in my chest. I told myself I was just nervous, just tired from the wedding, just overwhelmed. Still, when he wrapped his arm around me, I noticed how tight he squeezed. Not protective, possessive. Like he wasn't holding me. He was holding on to me. The resort itself looked like something out of a movie. Picture it. Endless infinity pools, palm trees swaying, couples walking barefoot in the sand like they were the only two people in the world. Staff greeted us with those frozen smiles, placing flower leis around our necks and offering fruity cocktails that smelled like sugar and rum. It was paradise on earth. And yet, as I stood there in my sundress clutching Daniel's hand, something inside me whispered, "Not all that glitters is gold." That night, our villa overlooked the ocean. The room was dripping in luxury, rose petals on the bed, champagne chilling in an ice bucket, candles flickering against sheer curtains that danced in the breeze. I should have been swept away, and in a way, I was. Daniel kissed me like a man staking a claim. He whispered promises of forever against my neck. He told me I was his dream, his prize, his everything. But do you know what I caught in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking? Calculation. It wasn't love in his gaze. It was something colder, sharper, like he was already planning the next step of a game I didn't even know we were playing. Still, I pushed it down. Who was I to question? We'd just said vows. People don't marry someone they don't love, right? Right? So I smiled. I let him pour the champagne. I let him hold me while fireworks exploded over the ocean that first night, painting the sky in pinks and blues. I whispered, "This is perfect." And he kissed me like he wanted me to believe it. But deep down, soft, shaky breath, I knew perfection is a mask. Little did Daniel know, our honeymoon wasn't just a celebration. Lean in, voice sharp. It was a test. And soon, he was going to fail.
The second night should have been even better than the first. You know how honeymoons go. Romance builds, the magic deepens, and you start picturing the rest of your life together. At least, that's what I thought. Daniel had been all charm during the day, We'd gone snorkeling in water so clear it looked like glass. He laughed when I panicked over a tiny fish brushing my leg. He kissed me underwater like we were in some cheesy rom-com. To anyone watching, we looked inseparable. And honestly, I wanted to believe we were. But that night, the mask slipped. It was around midnight. I'd fallen asleep early, exhausted from the sun and the drinks, when something pulled me awake. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the faint vibration of the mattress as Daniel got out of bed. My eyes fluttered open just in time to catch the glow of his phone screen across the room. He was whispering. I stayed still, breathing shallow, pretending to sleep. My heart pounded in my chest so hard I was afraid he'd hear it. He had his back to me, shoulders hunched, head bowed over the phone like he was praying to it. And then I heard it. His voice. Low, urgent. Don't worry. Once her accounts are in my name, I'll take care of us. I felt the blood drain from my face. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might vomit. Did I hear that right? Her accounts take care of us? Who the hell was us? He kept talking, each word slicing into me. Yeah, she trusts me completely. It's only a matter of time. The honeymoon's just the start. I'll transfer things over gradually. She won't even notice. I gripped the sheets so tightly my knuckles ached. My whole body went cold, but my face burned hot with shame and disbelief. I had married a thief, a liar, a man who didn't want me, just what I owned. And suddenly, all those moments clicked into place. The way he insisted on handling the bills, the way he brushed off conversations about prenups, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when money came up. I hadn't married a husband. I had married a predator. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap out of bed, grab his phone, and smash it against the wall. But something stopped me. A cold, sharp voice in my head whispered, "Don't show your hand. Not yet." So instead, I let my breathing stay slow and steady. I forced my body limp like I was dreaming. Meanwhile, every word he whispered into that phone seared into me like acid. Finally, he ended the call with a smug little laugh. He slid back into bed, smelling faintly of rum and cologne, curling his body around me as if nothing had happened, his arm draped across my waist like a shackle. And I lay there, wide awake, staring into the dark. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was sharpening, hardening. You ever feel betrayal so deep it flips a switch in you? Like grief that burns itself into rage? That was me right there. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just a bride. I was prey. And he thought I was weak. But Daniel had no idea who he was really dealing with. So I whispered to myself, so soft he couldn't hear, "If he wants to play games, I'll play, and I'll win." And that was the night everything changed. Because from that moment forward, my honeymoon wasn't about romance. Morning came with sunlight spilling across the villa, painting the room gold. Daniel stirred beside me, stretching like a cat who'd just eaten cream. He smiled that smile, the one that used to make my knees weak, the one that now looked like a weapon I hadn't recognized before. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice soft, lazy. like he was living in a dream. And I smiled back. I leaned in and kissed his cheek. I played the role of the blissful bride. My lips brushed his skin, while my stomach twisted. Because deep inside, I wanted to spit those words back at him, Mrs. Carter, as if he hadn't already planned to strip me of everything tied to my name. But instead, I whispered, "Good morning, love." It was the hardest performance of my life. We went down to breakfast at the resort cafe. You know those kinds of places? Buffets laid out like feasts, fruit carved into flowers, waiters who bowed just a little too deeply. Couples laughed around us, clanking mimosas, leaning across tables to whisper sweet nothings. I mirrored them perfectly. I laughed when Daniel told one of his empty jokes. I reached for his hand, pretending I couldn't live without his touch. To anyone watching, we were the picture of newly-wedded bliss. But inside, every sound he made scraped against my nerves. His laugh rang hollow, like a cheap bell. His eyes looked at me with a smugness I hadn't noticed before, like he was already counting his winnings. And all I wanted to do was rip the mask off his face and show the world who he really was. But I didn't. Instead, I built my own mask, a better one. I told myself, if he wants a game, I'll play. And I won't just win. I'll make him regret ever thinking I was weak enough to toy with. So I smiled. I fed him bites of fruit off my fork. I let him lean in and kiss me in front of strangers, his lips sticky with pineapple, and I pretended my heart was bursting with joy. Inside, rage was blooming, a quiet, dangerous bloom. Every fake laugh I gave him, every affectionate touch, every "I love you" whispered against his ear, it was fuel. Every moment was another brick in the wall I was building between us, another step in the trap I was preparing. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break you, it remakes you. And sitting there at breakfast, my fingers laced with the man who wanted to rob me blind, I felt myself hardening. I thought, you want my accounts? You want my trust? Fine. Let's see how much you enjoy choking on them when I rip the ground out from under you. But I kept my face soft, my laugh sweet, because if Daniel thought he was the only one who could wear a mask in this marriage, well, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. And the best part? He had no idea the game had already begun.
By the third night, I had perfected the mask. Daniel thought he was fooling me. He thought I was blissfully blind, soaking up paradise in his rehearsed charm. But every smile I gave him, every touch, was carefully calculated. I wasn't just the bride anymore. I was the spy. That evening, Daniel wanted to hit the resort's open bar. Of course he did. He'd been drinking more than usual, his laughter getting louder, his hands a little sloppier. People like Daniel, they always get sloppy when they think they've already won. So when he left me in the villa, saying, "Just relax, baby, I'll bring us back something special," I finally had my chance. My hands shook as I reached for his wallet, not from fear, but adrenaline. It was right there, tossed carelessly on the dresser. He'd never suspected I'd dare to touch it. To him, I was the sweet, naive wife too love-struck to question anything. I opened it. Inside was his whole life. Credit cards, IDs, receipts folded into neat little corners. I pulled out each card and laid them across the bed like playing pieces in a game. My phone camera clicked quietly in the silence as I snapped photos one by one, front, back, every number, every expiration date. And as I worked, I whispered to myself, "If he wants to take from me, I'll take first." I knew exactly what to do. I'd spent years building my accounts, my savings, my trust funds, carefully tucked away with the help of lawyers and bankers. And Daniel, he didn't realize I wasn't just some clueless girl with a wedding dress and a fat bank balance. I knew the system. I knew how to use it. With shaking fingers, I dialed my lawyer. It was nearly midnight back home, but he answered, groggy, confused. "Anna, are you okay?" My voice was steady, even though my heart was hammering. "I need to lock down everything, every account, every trust. Freeze them right now." There was a pause. "What happened?" "I'll explain later, just please do it now." He didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted him. Within minutes, he was sending confirmation codes to my email. Layers of security slamming down like iron doors. Next, I called the bank directly. I used the copies of Daniel's cards to flag suspicious activity. Each report added friction to his accounts. I knew it wouldn't drain them overnight, but it would tangle them enough to slow him down. And the whole time, I sat there on the bed, the ocean breeze pushing against the curtains, the sound of waves crashing in the distance. It should have been romantic. Instead, it was war. Do you know what it feels like to take control after realizing someone has been plotting against you? It feels like power. By the time Daniel staggered back into the villa, slurring from a night swimming ass, he stumbled into bed beside me, slurring, "Tomorrow, baby, we'll shop. I'll spoil you." I smiled in the dark, my body still, my voice sweet. I can't wait. But inside, I thought, by morning, the net will already be tightening, and you won't even see it coming.
The next morning, paradise looked the same, but I didn't. Sunlight streamed across the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly blue, and Daniel whistled in the shower like a man without a care in the world. But I was sitting at the little desk in our villa, sipping my coffee, my lips curled around a smile he couldn't see. Because I knew what was coming. Daniel walked out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, dripping water, looking smug and handsome in that superficial way that had once fooled me. He kissed the top of my head, told me to put on something pretty. We were going shopping. And I thought, yes, let's. We wandered into the little boutique shops just off the resort's beach. You know the kind. Overpriced sundresses, handmade jewelry, leather sandals that probably cost pennies to make but sold for hundreds. Daniel strutted around like a king, pointing out things he said I should try, puffing up his chest when the staff called us newlyweds. Then he pulled out his card. And that's when it happened. The clerk swiped once, frowned, swiped again, tapped at the register. "I'm sorry, sir," she said with that practiced politeness, "but your card has been declined?" I swear, it was like watching the first domino tip over. Daniel's grin froze on his face. He chuckled awkwardly, waving it off. "Oh, must be fraud protection. Happens when you travel. Try again." The clerk nodded, swiped again, shook her head, declined. For a split second, I saw it. The flicker of panic in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. But just as quickly, he smoothed it over, pulling out another card, like a magician with an endless deck of tricks. This one went through. Transaction approved. He winked at me, pretending it was nothing, and carried on like a man untouchable. But I knew better. I knew this was the beginning. Outside, he wrapped his arm around my shoulders, kissing my temple like he was reassuring me, like he was still in control. "See, baby, just a glitch. Happens all the time." I tilted my face up at him, giving him the sweetest smile I could muster. "Of course, love. I wasn't worried." But inside I was thrilled, because now the game had officially begun.
Every declined swipe was a string cut. Every blocked account was a little more of his carefully woven mask unraveling. And as he carried those shopping bags, walking tall and smug, he had no idea that by the end of this trip, he wouldn't be carrying anything at all. That night, as he sprawled on the bed watching some mindless TV, I stood by the balcony staring out at the ocean, the air thick with salt and jasmine. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another email confirmation. Accounts frozen, access restricted, barriers locked. I let the ocean breeze wash over me, my heart steady, my resolve stronger than ever. Daniel thought he'd married a prize, a fool, a golden ticket. But what he'd really married was the woman who was about to dismantle him, piece by piece. And the first freeze? That was just the beginning.
They say watching a liar get caught is one of life's purest satisfactions. I didn't know that before this trip, but by the fourth night, I was starting to understand it deeply. Because Daniel, he was beginning to unravel. Dinner at the resort was supposed to be one of those unforgettable nights. Candlelit tables right on the sand, the ocean lapping just feet away, a live band playing soft music that made couples sway in their chairs. Daniel wore his crispest shirt, all confidence and charm, while I slipped into a red dress that I knew made his eyes linger. He couldn't resist showing me off. That was his thing, making sure everyone knew I was his, or at least he thought I was. We ordered the works, lobster tail, champagne, desserts stacked like towers. He kept bragging to the waiter, throwing in little comments about our wedding, our honeymoon, our future. He winked at me across the table, that smug little glint in his eye. And then the bill came. He slid his card across the table like a king presenting a decree. The waiter disappeared, came back, and cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, sir, but your card was declined." Daniel's smile twitched, just a fraction, but I caught it. "Oh, really?" he said, forcing a laugh. "Must be the bank again. Fraud alerts. Try this one." He handed over another card. The waiter nodded, left again. Daniel tried to act like it was nothing, sipping his champagne, but I saw his jaw working. I saw the flicker of sweat at his temple. Then the waiter came back. "I'm sorry, sir, this one too." That was it. The second domino tipping. Daniel's hand clenched so tight around his glass I thought it might shatter. He snapped, sharper than he meant to. "Run it again. There's plenty of money in there." Other diners were starting to look. The music kept playing, but eyes turned to our table. Couples whispering, a staff member shifting nervously near the bar. And I sat there, the perfect bride. I reached across the table, touched his hand, smiled sweetly. "It's okay, love. These things happen. I can cover it." That was the kicker. I could see it in his face, the hit to his ego, his pride. He hated that. Hated the idea that his wife might need to pay when he was supposed to be the one in charge. "No," he said, too quickly, yanking his hand back. His voice strained, trying to stay even. "I've got it." He dug into his wallet again, pulled out yet another card, his fingers trembling just slightly. The waiter swiped it. Approved. Relief washed over Daniel's face so fast it almost made me laugh out loud. He forced a smile at me, raising his glass again like nothing had happened. But I knew. Every successful swipe was another delay before the inevitable. His net was shrinking, card by card, account by account. And the cracks, they were spreading.
Back in the villa, he paced. He thought I was brushing my hair at the vanity, but I was watching him through the mirror. He ran his hands through his hair, muttering under his breath, "Stupid bank. I'll call them tomorrow. Can't keep freezing my cards like this." His mask was slipping, piece by piece. And God, did it feel good. I said nothing, just kept brushing my hair, calm and serene, while inside my chest a storm of satisfaction raged, because this was what I'd been waiting for. Every declined card was another string cut from his puppet show, and I was the one holding the scissors. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have ended it there? Told him you knew everything, thrown it in his face? Or would you have done what I did? Let him dangle, let him sweat, let him squirm. Because I knew in that moment that dragging it out was so much better. And watching him unravel, knowing he thought he was still in control, that was the sweetest revenge of all.
There's a peculiar sound to rage when it's practiced quietly. It's not the cinematic scream or the shattering of plates. It's a careful, low hum that lives just beneath your skin, like an engine idling, waiting for the green light. That hum became my constant companion. I carried it to bed, into the grocery store, under birthday cakes, and through conversations where people praised Daniel like he'd never done anything wrong. I learned how to smother a sob and let the hum sit in its place. The first few weeks after I assembled the folder, I imagined I'd feel liberated, like a dam had broken and the flood would wash me clean. Instead, something colder arrived, a focused, almost surgical rage that was less about noise and more about efficiency. Anger had turned into strategy. I watched myself change. The impulsive, hurt woman who used to shout and smash plates was being replaced by someone quieter. Someone who could sit across from her husband and let him think he was untouchable while she planned the most precise dismantling imaginable. At dinner parties, I perfected a smile that acted like a veil. People told me how lucky I was. "You two always seem so perfect," someone would say, and I'd laugh, as if his infidelity were a funny anecdote and not a slow theft. Daniel loved the spotlight, and I learned to feed him just enough to keep him complacent. The more adored he felt, the more careless he became. It's a sick dynamic. The person you want to punish gives you the very prop you can use to take them down. Do you know what's worse than being humiliated? Being ignored in your humiliation. That's what drove me. The sting of being betrayed and then not being believed by the world I'd helped build. When he'd slip between the sheets with me after a late-night lie, my body would obey, but my mind would catalog the deceit. I lay there counting the breaths that weren't his, memorizing the way his arm rested so I could use that image later when people asked what happened. There is a cruelty in preserving the outward performance of normalcy while your interior collapses, but the cruelty was mine to wield. Silence became my weapon because words are messy. Words can be misinterpreted, shrugged off, or turned back on you. A raised voice can make you look unstable. Tears can be dismissed as theatrics. So I spoke less. I listened more. I learned to place my silence like a stone on the surface of water. The ripples carried everything I wanted them to, but the stone remained unblessed by drama. In social circles, my stoicism read as grace. In private, it read as calm before the storm. Daniel, of course, interpreted my quietness as either remorse or apathy. He started boring me with stories of work, of projects, of clients he'd impressed. He boasted about the promotions he'd been passed up for and the praise he was getting at the office. People asked how we kept our marriage strong. He loved answers that painted him as virtuous. I gave them to him because what I said tonight would not be the truth for long. But the quiet fed my rage in ways that were almost perverse. It let me watch him closely to see the micro-expressions he allowed himself when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The softening of his mouth when he read a text, the way he tilted his head towards someone on the phone, and the tiny smile that widened when he thought of Maya. I started cataloging those expressions too, like evidence in another case file.
You don't just expose a body, you expose the knees and elbows and the way it moved. I wanted to show people not just that he had betrayed me, but that he had been emotionally absent long before the physical act. My fury wasn't purely selfish. It was righteous in the small moralities I had once believed in. I had taught my kids to hold doors open for people, to look adults in the eye and say please and thank you. I had been the pillar of our home, the PTA organizer, the birthday cake maker, the laundry folder. There was an idea of me as the quiet domestic force behind a successful man. I wanted to reclaim that image by showing that the architecture of our family had been compromised, that the man people applauded had also been stealing our shared life. The rage settled its rules. No public scenes, no hysterics, no melodrama. I would maintain the facade until the opportune moment. In private, though, it was a different story. I practiced small acts that fed me, returning something he loved and watching him notice, casually rearranging photos so that people would see empty frames where once our vacations had been pictured side by side. I removed the magnets from the fridge that commemorated our first house. I took down the throw pillows he loved, the ones he always complained about. It was petty, yes, but it was also satisfying. One night, I replaced the playlist on his phone with songs from when we were young, the ones that used to make us laugh and dance. I watched him scroll through the track list only to see whether he'd noticed the sentimental choices. He didn't. He plugged in his headphones and left the room to take a call. Small victories bolster you more than you'd think. They serve as reminders that you were still present in the world he is trying to rewrite. I began to change the way I dressed. Not to attract him, the last thing I wanted was for him to feel desired, but to reframe myself in my own mirror. I bought a coat that fell perfectly, an expensive, silent thing that hugged my shoulders like armor. I cut my hair with a blunt confidence I'd never had. These changes felt like reclamation. When I looked in the mirror, I wanted to see not the betrayed wife, but a woman who could survive the fallout without shattering into someone unrecognizable. The kids, God, the kids, they were my frail soft center and my fiercest anchor. Every plan I made had to protect them. I had to be careful. Men like Daniel are unpredictable when they feel cornered. There were nights I lay awake imagining the worst-case scenarios. Would he lash out? Would he try to smear me? Would he use the custody of our little world as a weapon? My rage wrapped around those fears, knitting them into a resolute that was practical, not theatrical. I had to be ready to shield them without tipping my hand.
One evening, while the kids were at their grandparents', Daniel poured himself a drink and started to ramble about how hard it was to manage everything, about how much he wished we could go back to better days. He spoke of nostalgia as if it absolved him. I listened as if I were cataloging a confession. He wanted to talk, to soothe the air, to make it safe for himself. I let him. I sat across from him, the hum of my silent rage steady and patient. "You look tired," I said softly, watching him. "Yeah," he replied, "work's been brutal." "Do you ever," I asked, "that maybe we're just not as compatible as we thought?" It was a soft question, both honest and intentionally obtuse. He blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean, you always seem to find energy for other things," I said. "For work, for friends, for extracurriculars." He laughed, a self-satisfied sound. "Oh, come on, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I folded my hands in my lap, because sometimes I wonder who I married. The man who goes to the office to save the world, or the man who goes to the office to find something else. He turned away like I'd slapped him. "You're impossible." "You think so?" I let my voice even out. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm impossible to buy off with smiles and excuses. He walked out of the room after that, leaving the glass half-finished on the coffee table. He didn't come back with questions. He didn't ask for details. He simply resumed his life. That silence again felt like complicity. It felt like the kind of arrogance that comes when you believe nobody will ever unmask you. The rage was a steady climate inside me now. It warmed with small satisfactions and cooled with moments of crippling sorrow.
Sometimes I'd find myself crying in the shower, not because I believed he deserved absolution, but because the enormity of the life I'd been building had been compromised. Betrayal is 1,000 slashes to the same wound. You never stop feeling each cut, even when your plan is underway. But there was a clarity to the anger I had that almost felt holy. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about survival. I was not willing to be someone's second reason or a convenient truth. The rage steadied into something I could rely on. It became discipline. Clinic appointments to talk with a counselor under the guise of relationship maintenance, calls to lawyers supposedly about financial planning, and late nights on the computer where I choreographed the logistics of exposure. I needed allies, so I cultivated them quietly. Claire, who checked in and offered practical support, a paralegal friend who gave me legal boundaries, and a photographer who agreed to help with prints under the guise of family memorabilia. There were moral edges in what I planned to do. I knew that. I'd spent long hours on cold nights asking myself whether I was becoming what I hated. In those minutes of doubt, I'd call to mind the nights I had lain awake, the way he'd whispered another woman's name like it was a secret joke. The answer always returned. This was not vengeance for vengeance's sake. This was reclamation. One of the most personal acts of my silent rage was how I began to reclaim language. I stopped calling him honey in public. I started to use his name instead. Flat, precise, like a label. Daniel scheduled another dinner tonight, I'd tell a friend. It was small, but language is thievery in itself. It shapes reality. If I could name him plainly, maybe others would see plainly too. And then there were moments, rare, dangerous, that almost broke me. In the grocery aisle once, I watched him help a little old lady reach for a jar on the top shelf and felt this surge of tenderness toward him. For half a second, I missed him. The way he'd surprise me with coffee, the time he'd built a swing for the kids, the way he'd once looked at me like I was the only person in the room. That tenderness was a soft, sudden betrayal to the rage, and I hated it. It made me honest about how loss is messy. Loving someone and answering with retribution are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist like two predators circling one another. By the time the invitations went out for the anniversary party, my silence was complete. People expected me to perform my role, and I would. But underneath the sequin smile and the poised toast, the silent hum gnawed and prepared. I had become a woman who could wait, who could turn inward and make a plan that would make the world listen. If you've ever been where I was, where your life feels like a stage and everyone around you applauds the wrong actor, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have screamed? Would you have shouted from the rooftops? Or would you have, like me, let the quiet take you and use it to build something that could not be ignored? When the night of the party drew in, I felt something like holy calm. The storm inside me had a map. I had prepared witnesses, printed evidence, and a timing so exact that even the smallest detail couldn't be refuted. The silent rage was no longer an emotion. It was a plan in motion. And there was one truth I held close as we walked into that chandelier-lit room. The louder he celebrated himself, the more precarious his throne would become. Because while he drank in admiration, nobody was paying attention to the fact that I was holding matches.
The invitation was Daniel's idea, of course. That's what still makes me laugh in hindsight. He practically handed me the guillotine and told me to sharpen it. We were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, a glass of wine in my hand, his whiskey sweating against a coaster. He leaned back in his chair, smug from another successful week at work, and said, "You know what we should do? Throw an anniversary party. 15 years. That's a big one. People expect us to celebrate it." I looked at him over the rim of my glass, steady, unblinking. He didn't even flinch. He thought this was a grand romantic gesture, that I'd swoon over his desire to parade me like a prize he'd managed to keep. "Oh," I said lightly, "you think people care about anniversaries?" He chuckled. "Of course they do. People look up to us, to our marriage. We should give them something to celebrate." There it was again, the word us. He said it with the confidence of a man who believed us still existed, who believed he could curate reality the same way he curated his image at work. So I smiled, I nodded, and I let him think the idea was brilliant. That night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. My mind spun faster than the blades. The plan had been vague before. Expose him, make him fall. But now I had the perfect stage. A party. Guess. An audience. His idea. His pride. He would create the stage, and I would control the script. Do you see the poetry in that? Because I do. The next few weeks became a performance of collaboration. I sat across from him flipping through catering menus, pretending to debate salmon versus chicken. I walked with him through the event hall we eventually booked, admiring the chandeliers and polished floors, as though my heart wasn't rehearsing how it would feel to burn his kingdom to the ground. Daniel wanted the guest list to be impressive. Coworkers, clients, extended family, old friends. He wanted every person who thought highly of him to be there, clapping, congratulating, feeding his ego like a starving beast. "Let's make it classy," he said, tapping the list with his pen. "People should look back and say, 'Wow, Daniel really knows how to honor his wife.'" I had to bite the inside of my cheek from keeping from laughing. Honor his wife. If only he knew how those words would curdle on people's tongues. And here's the part that still makes me shiver when I think about it. He let me handle the invitations. He trusted me with the addresses, the RSVPs, the details. It was the equivalent of giving a wolf the keys to the sheep pen. I sent them out meticulously. Family, mine and his. Friends from college, his colleagues, including the ones he was always trying to impress. But the crown jewel? Maya, his mistress. It was easier than I thought. She had been sloppy, her number popping up in receipts and phone bills. Finding her address wasn't difficult. Writing her name on the cream-colored envelope gave me a satisfaction I can't fully describe. It was like inscribing fate. I didn't invite her as me. I phrased it as though it came from us, Daniel and I, a warm, welcoming invitation to celebrate our love. I sealed it with a neat flourish, picturing her opening it, smug and thrilled at the idea of being under the same roof as me, the clueless wife. What would she feel when the truth unraveled? Pride, shock, fear. I wanted to see it all. In the weeks leading up to the party, I played the role so well, I almost scared myself. I laughed at Daniel's jokes. I helped him pick a new suit. I feigned nervousness about the seating chart. He thought I was anxious about whether the food would be good enough or whether the flowers would arrive on time. The truth? I was only anxious about whether I'd timed the reveal perfectly. There's something intoxicating about control, especially when you've been powerless so long. Every yes, dear that left my lips was another brick in the wall closing in on him. Every friendly smile I gave at work or during coffee with friends was another disguise. I began to notice the shift in myself. My silence had been anger before, but now it was anticipation. It was the thrill of having a secret that would detonate in the middle of a chandelier-lit hall. One night, I sat at the dining table, long after the kids were asleep. The guest list was spread before me like a war map. I traced my finger along the names, imagining the ripple effect each envelope would create. His boss, his mother, his best man from our wedding, the neighbors who always waved from across the street. And then, her. Maya. I whispered it to myself.
Maya, the woman who thought she could carve a piece out of my life and claim it for herself? I thought of the receipts in my folder, the photos, the messages. I thought of how his hands had touched me and then touched her in the same week. I thought of how she probably believed she was special, that she was chosen. The rage flared, sharp and hot, but beneath it a chilling calm. She wasn't chosen. She was disposable, just like me, at least in his mind. That was the beauty of the invitations. When she walked into that party, she wouldn't just see me. She would see all of them, the entire audience. She wouldn't just be complicit in his betrayal. She'd be exposed as part of it. I sealed the last envelope and leaned back, staring at the neat stack. There's something ceremonial about invitations. They're promises of an event, little contracts of attendance. These weren't just invitations. They were summonses, witnesses called to a trial they didn't know they were attending. Daniel thought he was inviting people to a celebration, but I knew the truth. He had built a stage for his glory. I had built a stage for his ruin. And every single person who received one of those envelopes was about to see the real man behind the mask. Have you ever held on to a secret so heavy that it changes the way you breathe? That's what those invitations felt like. They weren't just pieces of paper. They were the sharp edge of justice, sealed with wax and delivered with a smile. When the last one was sent, I whispered to myself, "It's done." But it wasn't. Not yet. The stage was built. The guests were gathered. But the performance? That was still to come. And the part that got me awake at night was this. Once I set it in motion, there would be no turning back. Because in less than a month, my husband wasn't going to host an anniversary. He was going to host his own execution. You ever notice how the quietest plans are made with the loudest attention to detail? The actual act of revenge isn't fireworks and grand speeches in rehearsal. It's stamps and envelopes, font choices on printed messages, and the tactile sound of paper sliding into a folder. The real terror sits in minutia. That's where I lived for weeks, in font sizes, in the caliper of each photocopy, in the positioning of photos on a sheet so they could not be misread. I started in my small, pale office, my war room, where the folder from Chapter 3 had migrated into a sort of grim centerpiece. The evidence had cooled enough to be handled without my hands shaking, but the heat of the plan kept me awake. I bought a printer that could produce crisp, believable images and a quality of paper that looked official, not too glossy, not too cheap. If I wanted people to treat this as truth and not drama, presentation mattered. There's a surprising dignity in choosing the right cardstock. Claire came over with her usual supply of compassion and black coffee. She didn't ask many questions. Anyone who knows her knows she listens in short sentences and long pauses, perfect for long conspiracies. I handed her the stack of printed messages and hotel receipts and asked her to help me fold them into envelopes. "Who are these for exactly?" she asked, but didn't pry at the edges I flagged. "For everyone," I said. "Everyone who needs to know." We worked silently for hours, folding, sealing, writing names in my careful block letters. The envelopes were unassuming, cream with a little wax sticker I had bought for theatrical effect, and inside each one was a different kind of truth. Some had hotel invoices, some had incriminating text threads printed with timestamps and little arrows I'd added to point out the most damning lines. Some had photos. I mixed them deliberately so that no single envelope was identical in tone. I wanted the room to be messy when the papers were opened, face after face, a different kernel of proof for everyone, all adding up. You could almost hear the plan assembling itself in that room. Cardstock slid into paper trays. The printer complained once and then hummed, and over we printed, collated, and folded. I won't lie. The act of making those envelopes felt almost ceremonial. There was power in the repetition. Print, fold, press the wax, write a name, place into the bag. The envelopes were small, but lethal.
I also prepared a master packet, the complete dossier, intended not for casual hands, but for the people whose influence could create consequences. His mother, his boss, our mutual friends who had sway, the one neighbor who always talked to the local newspaper columnist at the dog park. Those master packets were thicker, bound with a paperclip and a calm label for immediate review. I imagined those packets landing in people's laps like stones. I wanted them to be heavy, literal and metaphorical. But the plan couldn't rely solely on paper. People are unpredictable. Some might fold the envelope and tuck it away. Some might assume it was a prank. So I layered my strategy. I created a signal with the venue staff. A server wearing a green tie would start handing out the envelopes after my toast. I had met with the event coordinator under the pretext of a special moment in the evening and convinced them that these sealed envelopes were part of an anniversary game we were doing, something about guests writing down favorite memories. The coordinator, a soft-spoken man named Arthur who loved gossip more than his job, loved the theatricality and agreed without knowing the content. Greed is useful when you need complicity. I rehearsed the moment in my head more nights than I can count. I pictured myself standing with a glass raised, voice trembling, then finding my center. I pictured Arthur nodding at the staff. I pictured the waiter's hand dipping into a bag and starting to distribute the envelopes. Timing was crucial. Too early and Daniel could intercept them and shred the proof. Too late and the impact would be muted. The window had to be after my toast, when everyone was focused on me and the room was still reverent. The reveal had to be surgical. Then there was the human variable, Maya. Inviting her had been complicated for reasons that were mostly ego and some practicality. I wanted her there unaware because the sight of her among family and coworkers would tear open any illusion she had about exclusivity. But I also considered the possibility she might not come, or worse, that she might have a friend with her who'd warned Daniel. For that contingency, I prepared digital backups, an untraceable email shell set up to send the same packets to targeted inboxes at the exact moment. If the staff faltered, my secondary plan would trigger. You'd be amazed at how long it took to build an untraceable email. There are tutorials and dumb mistakes and a lot of trial and error. I learned to think like someone who wanted to leave no fingerprints. I sent copies of key documents to an anonymous account that would forward them to several people simultaneously the moment I clicked send. I rehearsed this in my living room at midnight, watching the same papers appear in several inboxes like a constellation. It felt like modern witchcraft. Then there were the legalities. I spoke carefully to a paralegal friend, but we kept the conversations intentionally vague. I knew the boundaries. Invasion of privacy is a real legal sword, and one I didn't want wielded against myself. That's why I'd avoided hacking beyond what was necessary, and why I'd focused on receipts, photos, and messages that had been given to me through means that wouldn't come back to haunt me. If he sued, I wanted the evidence to be admissible, not a self-inflicted wound. The paralegal advised me on what I could and couldn't do and suggested that public humiliation often short-circuits legal action because the defendant's options become defensive and reactive. I like that phrasing, short-circuit. On a practical level, I also had to think about the kids. I set up a plan for them to be at their grandparents while the crescendo happened. No children at this kind of ritual. I knew too well how cruelty could ripple into little lives, and I drew a firm line. The children's safety was priority one. The revenge came with adult containment. I had Claire help arrange childcare and keep the kids occupied at their grandparents with cookies and cartoons. Claire was a saint in flip-flops during this whole ordeal.